And in exchange for those payments, we will not only preserve the forests, but use the resources to, first of all, make our economy more climate resilient. So take, for example, we lose about the equivalent of 10% of GDP per annum. For the past 10 years, we have lost this due to flooding. If we can have better flood control and water management, this gives us a huge saving. If we can use the resources, the payments from ecosystem services that our forests provide to generate alternative employment and economic opportunities in hydropower. We're building a hydropower now that will transform our entire carbon footprint for electricity. The entire country would be supplied from renewable energy. Very few countries in the world would have been able to do this. To bring in new fiber optic cables, to create new ICT-related jobs which are non-polluting, to build roads into the savannas so you don't have to cut the trees to do large-scale agriculture, then I can reasonably say to my people, you have an alternative path to prosperity. If I invest in education and healthcare, and then they can find alternative means. So our model says we can practice some environmental policies without compromising prosperity, but it has to be done in a system a global system and a global framework that values the services that forests provide, not just carbon service as a huge sink for carbon around the world, but also the ecosystem services. If we cut down the rainforest in South America, the rainfall patterns in North America will change too. It would affect the United States of America and Canada and crops there, outside of the huge loss of biodiversity that the young people of Korea, will be poorer for, because many of the medicines and stuff like that, the gene pool in our forests can provide many of the medicines for diseases that we haven't found cure for as yet. They provide so many services for the rest of the world. And so you too will be poorer if those forests are lost. So this is what we're trying to do. And I think sometimes it's unpopular, but if you spend enough time talking to people, bringing them along, and they're very concerned about the world, because the developed countries have not been very kind to the developing world. They've made lots of promises to deliver overseas development assistance aid and have never delivered on those promises. Since the 1970s, they promised 0.7% of their gross national income as development aid. Very little of that goes to the developing world. So they're saying to me, aren't you just putting your faith in countries that don't have a good track record at developing assistance? So you're going to lock our forests away on the promise or the hope that we will get this funding to generate an alternative economy. This is a big concern of theirs. But I think if you talk to them a lot, they want to do the right thing. And the right thing is preserving the forest.
I think it's really important for us to know just how interconnected we are. I mean, things that are happening in South America or Guyana, as you mentioned, just really impacting the youths here in South Korea, where you can sometimes be oblivious to what's happening at the other part of the world. Speaking of youth, President Nasheed, what do you say to the youth outside of the Maldives of their power to really halt the worst effects of climate change? And what do you say to your own people who are really at the brunt of climate change but are really not to blame for a lot of the effects that they're dealing with?
Well, Maldives is just Maldives is 1,200 islands, and all the islands are just 1.5 meters above the sea level. So even a small increase in the sea level is going to have a major impact on the islands. We are already facing that challenge. A number of our islands are having to be relocated. People are having to be relocated from one island to another. I think the impact of climate change is understood by us now. It's understood by those who actually believe in it. Of course, there are still skeptics. And now the question is, and of course, now the question is, how can us, those who believe in it, and especially the younger generations, impress upon the rest of the world to act now? If we do not act now, by the time you have children, my belief is, I think the science is very sorted here, that we will all be in trouble. So how much of an impact can you make? How involved do you have to be? I'm afraid you have to be very, very active, not just by sending emails, not just by a simple text or on the Facebook or on Twitter. You have to be out on the streets, I'm afraid. You have to go into direct action. And direct action brings results. And I would advocate you to be out on the streets demonstrating for change. We have come to this consumerism or this society also through a fair amount of direct street action in the 60s. Now we lost that culture and therefore we are very complacent and very comfortable in our homes thinking that everything will be fine. My experience is if you want something, you have to be consistent at it and focused on it. So my advice would be to go on into direct action and impress upon your governments, impress upon the rest of the world that here is an issue that everyone should be concerned about. Now, climate change is not just only an environment issue. When we say climate change is just an environment issue, we tend to marginalize it to the fringe. But climate change is a human rights issue. Climate change is a strategic issue. Climate change is an economic issue. So when you have all these issues converging and combining and crystallizing into such a concentration, the impact it has on our society and on our futures are very great. My advice in direct answer to her question is that it's no longer actually possible for us to be comfortably lodged at home. You have to be out on the streets. And please do that. We cannot let the responsibilities of our parents dictate the futures of our children. If we want to help our children, I'm actually talking about my children, and I'm talking about your children. And if we cannot do something now, God help us. We are really doomed. So my advice is, no, the Facebook is not enough. Sending an email or an SMS or on the Twitter is not enough. You have to be out on the streets with placards, with a megaphone, and impressing upon the rest of the world that here is an issue that we should all be concerned about.
There you hear from the president, who's asking you to take charge. So speaking of the youth, is there anyone who has a question they'd like to ask the panelists? And if you do, just raise. Yes. Can you make sure that you stand up and give us your name as well?
Hello, this is Hirari. I am Young Climate Change Ambassador in British Council, Korea. So we are youth group from British Council. And what we did in Korea is that we already organized some forum with 30 students, and the next step was we had also a workshop with 100 participants. I'm sure we are getting bigger and bigger. But for the next step, I think we should work together in all over the world. But I think in terms of climate change, we are separated, like developing country and developed country, I think. So is there any idea about how to communicate with developing country and developed country? And is there any tip for us to give us, please? Thank you.
Who would like to answer that question?